Burkina Faso has no coastline. Much of its land lies beneath the hard sand of the Sahel. Rain can be uncertain, rivers can shrink, and millions of families know what it means to live with the fear of a poor harvest. Yet across this dry nation, something unexpected is happening. Fish are growing inside floating cages, concrete tanks, and carefully managed ponds. A country often described only through conflict and hardship is quietly building a new source of food, income, and national confidence. This is not a miracle, and it is not a publicity stunt. It is the result of a deliberate decision to use every reservoir, every dam, and every available skill more wisely. Under the leadership of President Ibrahim, Traore fish farming has moved from the edge of agricultural policy to the center of Burkina Faso's campaign for food sovereignty. The question is no longer whether fish can be raised in a landlocked country. The real question is whether this new industry can grow fast enough to reduce imports, create jobs, and place affordable protein on more family tables. Stay with us, because by the end of this story, you will understand why these cages on quiet reservoirs may matter far beyond Burkina Faso. And if you believe Africa's progress deserves to be seen with honesty and respect, subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts about where you are watching from. Every comment helps carry Africa's voice further. To understand why fish has become so important, we must begin with the problem it is meant to solve. Burkina Faso has long depended on imported fish to meet domestic demand. That dependence sends scarce foreign currency abroad and leaves local consumers exposed to rising prices, transport costs, and disruptions beyond the country's control. At the same time, traditional farming remains heavily dependent on rainfall. Millet, sorghum, maize, and other staples are essential, but they become vulnerable when the rainy season arrives late or ends too soon. Expanding ordinary agriculture alone cannot solve every nutrition problem, especially when families also need reliable sources of protein. But fish offers a different path. Tilapia and African catfish can grow quickly, tolerate warm conditions, and be raised in water that already exists. Compared with many forms of livestock, they can convert feed into edible protein efficiently. A well-managed cage can produce several tons in a single cycle, while ponds and tanks can serve smaller farmers and cooperatives. This is why the government placed fisheries inside the National Agro-Pastoral and Fisheries Offensive. The stated ambition is to move toward 100,000 tons of fish per year. That figure remains far above current confirmed production. So it must be understood as a national target, not a finished achievement. Still, the direction is clear. Burkina Faso is no longer treating fish as a luxury imported from elsewhere. It is treating fish as a strategic food, a source of employment, and one more step toward deciding for itself how its people will be fed tomorrow. Burkina Faso's transformation becomes even more remarkable when you look beyond the statistics and focus on geography. This is a country without a single kilometer of coastline, yet it possesses an advantage that remained underused for decades. Across the nation are thousands of reservoirs, dams, and inland water bodies originally developed for irrigation, livestock, flood control, and hydroelectric purposes. Instead of treating these reservoirs as isolated infrastructure projects, the government has begun viewing them as productive assets capable of supporting an entirely new food industry. This simple shift in thinking has changed the conversation. Rather than spending enormous sums constructing artificial lakes specifically for aquaculture, Burkina Faso has chosen to build on what already exists. Floating cages can be installed directly on suitable reservoirs, dramatically reducing construction costs while making efficient use of available fresh water. It is a practical solution designed around local realities rather than expensive imported models. One of the best known examples is the Samandeni Dam. Once recognized primarily as a major water infrastructure project, it is now becoming one of the country's most important aquaculture centers. Producers operating floating cages there have reported encouraging harvests with several cages producing multiple tons of tilapia during a single production cycle. Similar efforts are expanding around the Bagré reservoir, the Sum Dam, and newer production sites such as Dori, where fish farming is gradually becoming part of local economic development instead of remaining an experimental activity. The technology itself is not overly complicated, and that is precisely one of its strengths. Large floating cages made from durable frames and a strong netting allow fish to grow within the natural water body while remaining protected and easy to manage. Water circulation occurs naturally, supplying oxygen without requiring the costly pumping systems often found in intensive land-based farms. Farmers monitor feeding schedules, fish density, and water quality every day, combining traditional experience with modern management practices. The two principal species being raised are Nile tilapia and African catfish. Both are well suited to West African conditions. Tilapia grows quickly, tolerates warm temperatures, and enjoys strong consumer demand. African catfish is equally valuable because of its resilience and year-round market appeal. By concentrating on species already familiar to consumers, producers reduce marketing risks while strengthening domestic supply. Technology alone, however, cannot build a sustainable industry. Feed remains the largest operating expense for most fish farmers. Recognizing this challenge, Burkina Faso has invested in domestic fish feed production while introducing measures intended to reduce production costs. Local feed manufacturing decreases dependence on imports, shortens supply chains, and gives producers greater confidence that essential inputs will remain available. What makes this strategy especially significant is that it extends far beyond the fish cages themselves. A complete value chain is gradually taking shape. Fish hatcheries produce fingerlings. Feed factories supply nutrition. Technicians provide training. Farmers raise the fish called storage facilities. Transport operators, wholesalers, and retailers move the harvest to consumers across the country. Every successful harvest, therefore, supports many different professions, creating economic activity that reaches well beyond the shoreline of any single reservoir. Instead of viewing each cage as nothing more than a place to grow fish, Burkina Faso is increasingly treating every reservoir as the foundation of a broader food production ecosystem. That shift in perspective may prove to be one of the country's most valuable innovations. Many observers naturally ask one question: is Burkina Faso's growing fish industry simply the result of a few isolated projects, or does it reflect a much broader change in national policy? The answer lies somewhere in between. While thousands of fish farmers, technicians, entrepreneurs, and local communities are doing the daily work, the rapid expansion of the sector would have been difficult without a major shift in government priorities. Under President Ibrahim Traore, food sovereignty has become one of the defining themes of Burkina Faso's development strategy. The idea is straightforward but ambitious. A country that depends heavily on imported food remains vulnerable to international price shocks, supply chain disruptions, and geopolitical uncertainty. Reducing that dependence means increasing domestic production wherever natural resources make it possible. Fish farming fits directly into that vision. Instead of treating aquaculture as a small branch of agriculture, the government elevated it to one of the strategic sectors within the National Agro-Pastoral and Fisheries Offensive. This decision transformed fisheries from a relatively overlooked activity into a national priority, receiving greater political attention, investment, and institutional support. That change in status alone encouraged both public agencies and private investors to begin taking the industry more seriously. One of the government's first priorities was reducing production costs. Fish feed represents the largest expense for nearly every commercial fish farmer. When feed prices rise, profits shrink, expansion slows, and many small producers struggle to survive. To address this challenge, Burkina Faso supported the establishment of domestic fish feed manufacturing facilities while introducing measures designed to lower the financial burden on producers. Local production cannot solve every challenge overnight, but it represents an important step toward greater self-reliance. Government support has also extended beyond infrastructure. Training programs have helped farmers understand stocking density, feeding schedules, water quality management, disease prevention, and harvest techniques. These practical skills often determine whether a production cycle succeeds or fails. Modern aquaculture depends as much on knowledge as it does on equipment. Another important feature of the current approach is the relationship between the public and private sectors. Rather than operating every fish farm itself, the government focuses on creating favorable conditions through infrastructure, technical assistance, policy incentives, and financing mechanisms. Cooperatives, family businesses, and private entrepreneurs remain responsible for daily production. This model allows public investment to stimulate private economic activity instead of replacing it. At the same time, it is important to keep the discussion balanced. The expansion of Burkina Faso's fish industry should not be attributed to one individual alone. National leadership can establish priorities, mobilize resources, and coordinate institutions. But long-term success depends on thousands of producers who feed the fish every day, technicians who solve practical problems, researchers improving production methods, transport workers delivering fresh harvests, and consumers choosing locally produced fish. Perhaps that is the most important lesson from this stage of Burkina Faso's journey. Vision creates direction, but ordinary people create results. Every floating cage that reaches harvest represents months of careful work by families whose names rarely appear in headlines. Their commitment is transforming policy into reality, one harvest at a time. When people talk about Burkina Faso's fish farming program, it is easy to focus on the cages, the reservoirs, or the government policies. But the real story becomes much more powerful when you look at the people whose lives are changing because of it. Across the country, fish farming is creating opportunities for groups that have often been left behind by traditional economic development, particularly women, young people, and families displaced by insecurity. One remarkable example comes from eastern Burkina Faso, where a group of Women who had been forced to flee violence refused to allow tragedy to define their future. After leaving their villages with very few possessions, they settled near Fadanaguma and established a cooperative with a simple but ambitious goal: to build a new livelihood through fish farming. Starting with only a few concrete tanks and basic equipment, they learned modern aquaculture techniques, managed their production carefully, and gradually expanded their operations. What makes their project especially impressive is that they learned to maximize every available resource. Instead of discarding water after raising fish, they redirected the nutrient-rich water into vegetable gardens where they cultivated onions, okra, eggplants, and other crops. One source of water produced two valuable harvests. Fish generated income and protein, while vegetables improved household nutrition and created an additional source of revenue. In a region where water is one of the most precious resources, this integrated approach demonstrates that innovation is often about using existing resources more intelligently rather than simply finding more of them. Women are not only becoming producers, they are becoming trainers, cooperative leaders, and business owners. As successful farmers gain experience, they pass their knowledge to neighbors, relatives, and other communities. Skills that once depended on outside experts gradually become local expertise. This transfer of knowledge may ultimately prove just as valuable as the fish themselves, because sustainable development depends on people who can continue improving the system long after individual projects have ended. Young people are also finding new opportunities. Every fish farm requires workers to monitor water quality, feed fish several times each day, repair cages, transport fingerlings, maintain equipment, harvest mature fish, and deliver fresh products to local markets. Beyond the farms themselves, employment expands into feed production, cold storage, transportation, equipment, manufacturing, fish processing, and retail sales. Each successful harvest supports an entire chain of economic activity that stretches far beyond the reservoir where the fish are raised. This broader economic impact explains why fish farming is increasingly viewed as more than an agricultural project. It is becoming a rural development strategy. Instead of relying on a single crop that depends entirely on seasonal rainfall, communities gain access to multiple sources of income spread across different industries. That diversification makes local economies more resilient during difficult years. Perhaps most importantly, fish farming restores something that cannot easily be measured in production statistics or financial reports. It restores confidence. Families who once depended on assistance begin earning their own income. Young workers discover skilled professions close to home. Cooperatives prove that collaboration can create opportunities where isolation once created hardship. Every successful harvest sends the same message: progress is possible, even in places where many people expected only decline. Every inspiring story deserves an honest examination, and Burkina Faso's aquaculture transformation is no exception. The progress achieved over the past few years is real, but so are the challenges that stand between today's encouraging harvests and tomorrow's ambitious national goals. In many ways, the future of the industry will depend less on building additional floating cages and more on solving a series of practical problems that every successful aquaculture nation has faced before. The first challenge is scale. Burkina Faso's long-term objective of producing 100,000 tons of fish annually has captured public attention. Yet independently reported aquaculture production remains significantly below that figure today. This does not mean the national strategy has failed. Instead, it reminds us that there is an important difference between political ambition, installed production capacity, and verified annual output. Every new production site, every successful harvest, and every new farmer contributes to closing that gap. But reaching such an ambitious target will require years of consistent growth rather than a few impressive pilot projects. Feed continues to represent one of the industry's greatest economic obstacles. For many producers, feed accounts for the largest share of production costs. Even though domestic feed manufacturing is expanding, factories must continue producing sufficient quantities at competitive prices while maintaining quality standards. If feed becomes too expensive or difficult to obtain, profit margins shrink quickly, making expansion less attractive for small producers who already operate with limited financial resources. Fingerling production presents another critical challenge. High-quality juvenile fish are the foundation of every successful harvest. Without reliable hatcheries capable of supplying healthy fingerlings throughout the year, producers cannot fully utilize their cages or ponds. Several projects have already experienced delays because fingerling availability failed to keep pace with the rapid expansion of production sites. Strengthening hatchery capacity will therefore remain essential as the industry grows. Water quality also demands constant attention. Floating cages benefit from natural water circulation, but they are not immune to environmental risks. Overstocking fish, excessive feeding, or poor waste management can reduce oxygen levels, increase disease outbreaks, and threaten the long-term health of reservoirs. Sustainable aquaculture requires continuous monitoring, scientific management, and responsible production practices. Protecting water resources today ensures that future generations can continue benefiting from them. Finally, the industry must strengthen what happens after harvest. Producing fish is only the beginning of the value chain. Fresh fish must be transported quickly, stored under proper refrigeration, and delivered efficiently to wholesalers, retailers, restaurants, and consumers. Without adequate cold storage facilities, refrigerated transport, accessible financing, and organized marketing networks, farmers may struggle to sell their harvest at profitable prices. A successful aquaculture sector depends just as much on logistics and markets as it does on ponds and cages. These challenges should not discourage observers. On the contrary, they demonstrate that Burkina Faso is now confronting the same practical questions faced by every country that has built a modern aquaculture industry. The next chapter will depend on how effectively these obstacles are addressed, transforming early success into long-term national resilience. As Burkina Faso's aquaculture sector continues to expand, it has also become the subject of growing international debate. Supporters describe it as one of the country's most promising development initiatives, while critics argue that some expectations surrounding the sector may be overly optimistic. Understanding both perspectives is essential because a balanced assessment is always more valuable than simple praise or blanket criticism. Some Western analysts question whether Burkina Faso can realistically achieve its ambitious production targets within the announced time frame. Their concerns focus on several practical issues, including financing, infrastructure, security challenges, environmental management, and the availability of reliable production statistics. Others point out that Political communication sometimes highlights long-term ambitions alongside early project successes, making it important to distinguish between future objectives and independently verified results. These questions deserve careful consideration rather than dismissal. Large-scale agricultural transformation is never easy, especially in a country facing security pressures and climate uncertainty. Transparent reporting, independent monitoring, and continuous evaluation will remain important if public confidence is to grow alongside production. At the same time, criticism should not obscure measurable progress. Floating cages have been installed, farmers have completed successful harvests. Domestic fish feed production is expanding, training programs are producing new technical skills, and additional reservoirs are gradually joining the national aquaculture network. These developments represent concrete investments rather than theoretical proposals. Perhaps the most constructive way to evaluate Burkina Faso's strategy is not by asking whether every target will be reached immediately, but whether the country is building stronger institutions, better infrastructure, and greater productive capacity than it had only a few years ago. On that question, there is evidence that important foundations are being established, even if the final destination remains some distance away. The broader lesson extends well beyond Burkina Faso. Across Africa, many countries possess valuable natural resources that have never been fully integrated into national development strategies. Some have extensive inland waters, others possess fertile agricultural land, renewable energy potential, or abundant mineral resources. The challenge is rarely the complete absence of opportunity. More often, it is the absence of coordinated investment across the entire value chain. Burkina Faso's experience demonstrates that development cannot rely on production alone. Success requires hatcheries, affordable feed, technical education, transportation networks, cold storage, financing, organized markets, and policies that encourage entrepreneurs to invest with confidence. When these elements develop together, each strengthens the others. Another lesson concerns resource efficiency. In a region where water remains precious, integrated systems that combine fish farming with vegetable production show how a single resource can support multiple forms of food production. Rather than consuming more water, communities learn to generate greater value from every available liter. That philosophy of efficiency may become increasingly important across the Sahel as climate pressures continue to grow. Finally, Burkina Faso's story reminds us that genuine food sovereignty is not about isolating a country from international trade. It is about giving nations greater freedom to choose. Countries that can produce more of their essential food domestically become less vulnerable to external shocks while remaining free to cooperate with partners around the world. That balance between self-reliance and international cooperation may ultimately prove to be one of the most valuable lessons emerging from Burkina Faso's quiet aquaculture revolution. Now, step back for a moment and consider what this story truly represents. At first glance, it appears to be about fish. Look a little deeper, however, and it becomes a story about how a nation chooses to respond to its challenges. Burkina Faso could have accepted the belief that a landlocked country with a harsh climate would always depend on imported food. Instead, it chose to ask a different question. How can we make better use of what we already have? The answer has taken shape on reservoirs scattered across the country, inside floating cages filled with tilapia and catfish, in newly established feed mills, in hatcheries producing fingerlings, and in training centers where farmers learn modern aquaculture techniques. It can also be seen in the determination of women rebuilding their lives after displacement, young entrepreneurs entering a new industry, and technicians helping local producers solve problems that once seemed impossible. No serious observer would claim that Burkina Faso has already achieved all of its ambitions. The country still faces significant challenges, from expanding hatchery capacity and lowering feed costs to improving cold chain logistics, protecting water quality, and maintaining production despite security concerns. The goal of producing 100,000 tons of fish annually remains a long-term objective rather than a completed achievement. Yet, every successful harvest demonstrates that progress is measured not only by the destination, but also by the direction of travel. Perhaps that is why this quiet transformation has attracted so much attention across Africa. It shows that development does not always begin with massive industrial projects or extraordinary natural advantages. Sometimes it begins with a practical decision to rethink existing resources, strengthen local knowledge, and connect public investment with private initiative, reservoir by reservoir, cooperative by cooperative, and harvest by harvest. Burkina Faso is building experience that may prove valuable far beyond its own borders. For other African nations, the lesson is not to copy every policy, exactly as Burkina Faso has implemented it. Every country has different geography, institutions, and economic conditions. The real lesson is to identify underused resources, build complete value chains instead of isolated projects, invest in people alongside infrastructure, and measure success through long-term resilience rather than short-term headlines. Whether Burkina Faso eventually reaches its production target or not, one fact is already clear. The country has changed the conversation. Instead of asking whether a dry, landlocked nation can develop a modern aquaculture industry, more people are beginning to ask how far that transformation can go. If you found this story valuable, let us know your thoughts in the comments. Can Burkina Faso achieve true food sovereignty through initiatives like this? Or do you believe greater challenges still lie ahead? We would love to hear your perspective. And if you enjoy thoughtful stories about Africa's development, innovation, and future, be sure to subscribe and join us again across the continent. New ideas are reshaping old assumptions every single day. From Pan-African cooperation and the vision of Captain Ibrahim Traore in Burkina Faso to broader conversations within the African Union about sustainable development and Pan-Africanism, the story of Africa New is still being written. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next video. Thank you for being here and watching our video. Every piece of content on this channel is carefully researched, written, edited, and reviewed by our team to ensure it reflects our own work and editorial approach. We do not rely on automated mass production. Each video presents our perspective on current events related to President Ibrahim Traore and developments across Africa.